Imagine waking up to the news that the president, who threatened to deport a mayoral candidate, who called him a communist, who promised to cut billions in federal funding if he won, is now inviting that same man into the Oval Office. Just 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump was doing everything in his power to stop Zohran Mamdani from becoming mayor of New York City. He endorsed Mamdani's opponent. He questioned his citizenship. He warned that electing him would be a disaster for America's largest city. And then, Mamdani won anyway. Over 1 million New Yorkers voted for him on one message: affordability. Now this Friday, the two men will sit down, face to face in Washington, and the shift from enemy to negotiation partner tells you everything about what's really driving American politics right now. Stick with me, because once you see why Trump changed his tune, you'll understand the power shift that's reshaping both parties. On Tell to Use, with my Nower, with my Ra, let me walk you through exactly what happened, because the timeline matters here. Late Wednesday night, November 19th, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, and the post was classic Trump. Pot announcement, pot jab, completely impossible to ignore. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, Communist Mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, has asked for a meeting. We have agreed that this meeting will take place at the Oval Office on Friday, November 21st. Further details to follow. Notice something interesting. Trump still called him a communist. He still put Mamdani's middle name in quotation marks, as if to highlight it, but he agreed to the meeting. Within hours, Mamdani's team confirmed. His spokesperson Dora Pekic released a statement that was careful, diplomatic, strategic. She said, as is customary for an incoming mayoral administration, the mayor-elect plans to meet with the president in Washington to discuss public safety, economic security, and the affordability agenda that over 1 million New Yorkers voted for just 2 weeks ago. Now let's pause on that phrase, as is customary, because while it's true that new mayors often meet with sitting presidents, this situation is anything but customary. We're talking about two men who spent months attacking each other. Trump threatened to withhold federal funding from New York City. Mamdani stood on stage the night he won and told Trump to turn the volume up, because New York was going to show the country how to defeat him. So why is this meeting happening? Well, for one thing, Mamdani reached out first. His team contacted the White House shortly after the election, and Mamdani explained it simply. He made a commitment to New Yorkers that he would meet with anyone, work with anyone, as long as it benefited the 8.5 million people living in the city. That's pragmatism, not ideology. And here's what makes it fascinating. Trump could have ignored the request, or delayed it, or turned it into another culture war battle. Instead, he agreed almost immediately. On Sunday, just days before the announcement, Trump told reporters at Joint Base Andrews, the mayor of New York would like to meet with us, and we'll work something out. We want to see everything work out well for New York. We want to see everything work out well for New York. A remarkable shift in tone from a president who weeks earlier called this same mayor a threat to the city's survival. So what's on the table for Friday? Officially, they'll discuss public safety, federal funding, economic policy. New York City receives about $7.4 billion in federal funding annually. Money for housing, social services, infrastructure, disaster relief, not pocket change. And Trump controls whether that money flows smoothly or gets tied up in bureaucratic delay. But there's something bigger happening beneath the surface. And to understand it, you need to see what happened in the weeks leading up to this moment. Now, step back for a second, because once you understand what shifted behind the scenes, the entire calculation changes. Let me take you back to election night. Thanks for watching. An hour butter. November 4th, 2025. Election night in New York City. Zohran Mamdani walks onto a stage in Brooklyn. Crowded, loud, electric, and he's just been declared the winner. with 50.4% of the vote. He's about to become the youngest mayor in more than a century, the first Muslim mayor, the first South Asian mayor in New York City history. And in his victory speech, he doesn't play it safe. He looks straight into the camera and says, "Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up." That line, delivered with a grin, captured the entire election in 5 seconds. Because, just 48 hours earlier, Trump had thrown the full weight of the presidency into stopping Mamdani from winning. On Monday, November 2nd, the day before the election, Trump posted what might be the most aggressive presidential intervention in a local race in modern American politics. He wrote on Truth Social, "If Times communist candidate Times Zohran Mamdani wins the election for mayor of New York City, it is Times highly unlikely, that I will be contributing federal funds, other than the Times, bare minimum times as required, to my beloved first home." Then he warned, New York would face complete and total economic and social disaster if Mamdani won. He called Mamdani a communist over and over, even though Mamdani calls himself a Times Democratic Socialist and has said repeatedly he is not a communist. But Trump didn't stop at rhetoric. Over the summer, he threatened to Times arrest Times Mamdani if he interfered with ICE operations. He questioned whether Mamdani was even in the country legally, despite Mamdani being a U.S. citizen since 2018. He even floated publicly that Mamdani might be Times deportable and in the final days of the race, Trump endorsed Andrew Cuomo, the former governor who resigned in disgrace, telling New Yorkers they had no choice but to vote for Cuomo to save the city. So what happened? Why did every one of these attacks fail? The answer is simple, and it's the same answer: reshaping elections across the country. Affordability. Mamdani ran on exactly one message: make New York affordable again, freeze rents on rent-stabilized apartments, free bus service in all 5 boroughs, universal childcare, city-run grocery stores, to fight price gouging. Agree or disagree with those policies. That's not the point. The point is, Mamdani talked about the cost of living. Trump talked about ideology. Mamdani talked about rent, groceries, childcare. Trump talked about communism. And voters chose the person who spoke directly to their daily reality. And here's the part that stings the most for Trump. This happened in his hometown, the city where he built Trump Tower, where he built his identity, his brand, his mythology. New Yorkers heard his warnings and ignored them. Turnout hit its highest level for a mayoral race since 1969. More than 2 million votes cast, over 1 million of them for Mamdani. The contrast could not be sharper. Throughout the campaign, Trump kept insisting the economy was booming. We have the greatest economy in history. He said it on loop. But voters weren't feeling a boom. They were feeling their grocery bills rise, their rent climb, their childcare costs explode. And when someone finally stood up and said, "I see what you're going through, and I'm going to try to fix it," they listened. That's what Trump misread. You cannot tell people the economy is perfect when they're struggling to pay their bills, and you cannot scare them away from a candidate by calling him names, when that candidate is the only one offering real-world answers to real-world problems. Mamdani won because he understood what voters actually cared about. Trump lost because he was fighting yesterday's battle. An oversight of 9-minder. In the round doctora South, the Fuller. Now here's where the story stops being local politics and starts becoming a national warning sign. Because Mamdani's win in New York didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the first domino in a chain. Republicans absolutely did Times not Times see coming. An oversight of 9-minder. In the round doctora South, the Fuller. 2 weeks later, November 4th, Americans went to the polls again for state and local races across the country. And the GOP got times wiped out asterisk. Georgia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, not fringe states, not symbolic states, states with real political power, and they all swung hard against Republicans. Behind the scenes, GOP strategists started calling around, trying to understand what happened. And the answer they kept hearing was the same answer New Yorkers gave Mamdani: affordability, the cost of living, the grocery bill that keeps growing, the rent check that feels like a ransom note, not immigration, not foreign policy, not culture war flare-ups. The economy, specifically, the part of the economy people feel every single day. The Associated Press ran its voter survey that night. The results weren't bad for Republicans. They were catastrophic. Economic stress was the #1 concern for voters in every competitive state. And Trump's national approval? 36%. Not a crisis on paper. But here's the part that terrified the White House. It was the Times. Exact same approval times he had at this moment in his first term, right before Republicans got obliterated in the 2018 midterms. History wasn't repeating, it was accelerating. When the reseval to find eyes, we having that seval to find eyes by Mader and the reseval to find eyes inside Washington, Republican leadership went into denial mode. Talking points leaked to the AP claimed everything was great. The economy is strong. Voters are happy. Trump is more popular than Obama or Bush were at this point. Except none of that was true. Trump's approval was times lower times than both Obama's and Bush's at this stage in their presidencies, and voters had just proven, repeatedly, they weren't buying the great economy message. Here's the twist. While GOP leaders were lying to themselves, Trump wasn't. Say what you want about him. The man reads a room. He reads polls. He watches which crowds cheer, and which crowds fold their arms. And in mid-November, he pivoted hard. On November 14th, he posted, "We are the party of affordability." A complete reversal. For months he'd insisted the economy had never been stronger. Now he was adopting the exact message Mamdani had used to beat him in New York. Suddenly Trump was talking about grocery prices. He was talking about family budgets. He slashed tariffs on beef and other commodities. He rolled out policies aimed at lowering everyday costs. The White House didn't spin it. They didn't brag. They didn't frame it as strength. It was survival. A strategic adaptation to a political map that was shifting under his feet. When the Resavansuer and Harther's daughter, and that's Turizar, and Harther are last of I like this, and Mamdani, Trump went from threatening to cut off funding to calling him the mayor of New York City, from calling him a communist to saying, "We want to see everything work out well for New York." That wasn't softness. That was calculation. Trump saw that every time he mocked affordability messaging, voters sided with the person talking about high costs, not with him. Republican strategist Doug High summed it up perfectly to the AP. Republicans need to show voters they understand what they're going through. That's hard to do when the president keeps insisting everything is already perfect. And that's the trap Trump walked into. He spent so long boasting about stock market highs and GDP growth that he lost touch with how people were living. Mamdani, meanwhile, did the opposite. He treated voters like adults. He acknowledged their struggle. He offered solutions. Big ones, controversial ones, but real enough to feel tangible. He won because he spoke to the pain people feel between paychecks. Trump lost because he kept insisting there was no pain. So when Trump looked at the data, looked at the election results, looked at the 36% approval, he realized something. If he couldn't beat the affordability message, he'd have to times absorb times it. And absorbing it meant sitting down with the guy who just proved it wins elections. As a teenager, as occurring on the taprifations in the positive ass of the taprifations, I was a very buy-in taprifations. So, what's really happening this Friday when Trump and Mamdani sit down in the Oval Office? On the surface, it looks routine. A president and a newly elected mayor discussing federal funding, public safety, infrastructure. Standard stuff. But underneath, this meeting signals something much bigger. A moment when political reality overtakes political theater. Think about what Trump is implicitly admitting by taking this meeting. He's acknowledging that Mamdani isn't going away. He's acknowledging that the affordability message Mamdani ran on actually resonates with voters. And he's acknowledging that he needs New York more than New York needs him. Because here's the thing. Trump can threaten to cut federal funding all he wants. But New York is the financial capital of America. It's home to Wall Street, major corporations, and millions of voters in a state that matters. Alienating New York completely isn't just bad politics. It's bad for the country. Mamdani understands his leverage. He won with over 1 million votes in a city of 8.5 million people. He has a mandate, and he's made it clear he'll work with anyone, including Trump, as long as it benefits New Yorkers. But he's also made it clear he won't back down on the issues that got him elected. That's not ideology. That's strategy. He knows that if he folds on affordability, on rent freezes, on free buses, he loses the very thing that made him mayor. What we're watching is a test case for a much bigger question in American politics. Can progressives win on kitchen table issues without being dragged into culture war battles? Mamdani's victory suggests they can. He didn't win by talking about abstract ideological fights. He won by talking about rent, groceries, childcare. And Trump, whatever you think of him, is pragmatic enough to recognize when something works. There's a broader leadership lesson here that goes beyond left versus right, beyond Democrat versus Republican. The leaders who succeed are the ones who actually listen to what people need, not what they assume people should want. Mamdani listened. Trump, for months, didn't, and the election results spoke for themselves. Now Trump is adjusting course. That's not flip-flopping. That's learning. Friday's meeting will set the tone for the next 4 years of Trump's presidency, and the next 4 years of Mamdani's mayoralty. If they find common ground on infrastructure, disaster relief, programs that help working families, both of them win. If they turn it into another fight, both lose. And more importantly, the people they serve lose. This is bigger than two politicians sitting in a room. It's a question of whether the system can still solve real problems when the stakes get high. So here's what I want you to take away from all this. 2 weeks ago, these two men were enemies. Trump was calling Mamdani a communist, threatening to end his political future before it even started. Mamdani was telling crowds that New York would show America how to defeat Trump. And now, this Friday, they're sitting down to negotiate. Not because they suddenly like each other, but because political reality left them no choice. The real lesson here isn't about Trump or Mamdani as individuals. It's about power and how it shifts when leaders ignore what people actually need. Trump learned, the hard way, that you can't tell voters the economy is great when they can't pay their rent. Mamdani learned that even presidents you disagree with control resources you need. And both learned that pragmatism beats ideology when real stakes are on the table. Friday's meeting won't solve everything. There will still be fights over funding, over policy, over priorities. But it's a start. And in a political climate where cooperation feels impossible, even a start matters. If you want to understand where American politics is actually heading, not the theater on cable news, but the real power moves behind closed doors, pay attention. Because this meeting is only the beginning, the balance of power is shifting faster than most people realize. And the more you understand how these pieces move, the better decisions you can make about what comes